Hello, this is Anika. It is July 15th, 2025. I'm recording this on a warm, sunny summer afternoon here in Poland. Busy, about to go outside for some gardening. Also busy working on my dissertation papers because I am soon going to be entering the final year of my PhD program, four-year program. The fourth year starts this autumn. So I'm gradually beginning to explore opportunities for the future for work. And as part of that, also looking at different foundations of projects and research ideas I have that I want to bring with me to whatever my next home base, my next work base will be. And one of those is a project I recently launched in the form of simply of, to begin with, a survey, an interview experience called Pandemic Insights. If you follow any of if you're connected with me on any platform or follow Pedestrian Space, you might have seen a little bit about it. I've designed an interview experience that is about the pandemic and memories from the pandemic as relates to themes that I already work with in research, mobility, space of the community, your town, your city, your neighborhood, and memories from the pandemic and specifically the lockdowns. Now, as we know, not everybody went through a lockdown. I myself did not experience a lockdown, nor did my family. We lived in Sweden at the time, which did not have a lockdown. However, as anybody who was there can attest, there were many macro restrictions on the ground. Pedestrian Space itself was, you could almost say, a pandemic project. I launched the Instagram account for Pedestrian Space May 17th, 2020, and it was largely due to um, observing in those early days of the pandemic and lockdowns happening all over the world, largely observing through the news and different media how much our relationship to our space, the spaces of our neighborhoods and our communities, were being shaped, reshaped by the different restrictions. And so this interview experience, this survey, and what I intend to be later, the research, is really about insights gained during that time related to various restrictions linked to public space, urbanism, mobility. For some people, their experiences were defined by trauma and isolation. For a lot of people, they weren't. Every experience was so different. People had huge spectrum of experiences. And as we know, there was loads of research continuing to come out about the lockdown, about the pandemic from various disciplinary perspectives. So I don't necessarily think that what I'm doing is hasn't been looked at. Of course it has. There's a lot of interesting material out there, which is exciting because I can be able to reference that and look at it. But the pandemic was only 5 years ago. There was research being produced during the pandemic about lockdown experiences, which is also interesting in itself. People in the lockdown researching the lockdown experiences, I think that was necessary thing to look at in the moment. Now that we have a little bit of distance, 5 years is not a long time, but I've already noticed through my interviews, sure, people have put distance to themselves, whether it's just simply, a function of memory. Many of us don't necessarily remember everything that happened earlier this year, or also due to specifically not wanting to remember. So the Pandemic Insights interview and survey for me is an experience for people to take part in. I have it as a survey, so I do have a link. However, I'm preferring to interview people live, usually via Zoom, as much as possible because I find the opportunity to elicit a bit more, to have that spaciousness of a conversation rather than just simply sitting and responding to questions. I'm finding, interestingly, with some questions, I'm finding people even instinctively going for an answer and then pivoting and saying, hey, hang on, now that I think about it, I'm going to answer in a different way. So for me, the interview experience, it's a trip in itself, to go on that memory journey with people. I was at a conference earlier this year, the Urban Future Conference, and I had the opportunity to speak on a panel called Walk It Off. And I started that with a little mini, what I called time trip, time travel back to the pandemic and a little breathing exercise. And then when people came out of it, sharing with their neighbors that they're seated next to what came up during that time. It was a little guided, like, memory tour, meditation related to the pandemic. And that was a test. That was a tiny little experiment to test that out. And I knew while I was doing it, I'm going to have to do this as an entire workshop. And I'm really excited. I have that opportunity this September. I'm going to be at the New Mobility Conference in Congress, excuse me, in Katowice. And I will be hosting a workshop designed around this very theme. So taking people on a little memory tour, guiding them um, back to the pandemic, sitting in that space and revisiting some memories to look for insights, to discover insights. Some people have thought a lot about this, a lot of people haven't. So I intend it as an interesting experience also for the interviewee, for anybody who's taking part. And this morning I was checking my accounts, my messages. I was on my pedestrian space account, and I don't often do this. I check my primary messages, but I don't often check my message requests because usually it's a bunch of spam. However, I'm glad I checked it today because I had several messages from people who were responding. If you follow any of my accounts or connected with me, I've been sharing little bits and pieces here and there about this pandemic stories and welcoming people to write and participate, write if they want to participate in an interview. And I had a handful of people writing saying, hey, I would love to do this. So thank you on Instagram. You know who you are. Hello. Look forward to speaking with you and or sending you the survey link. And I also look forward in the future not only to finding my future work base, a future home for my research and work beyond my PhD program, but also potentially collaborating with could be municipalities or research institutes who maybe find this approach interesting, because I think it will be really interesting to take this method and this survey to a specific city level or cities, town or city, or even potentially regional and or national as well. I'm really open to explore the different geographic scales because I think that will also produce some really interesting results when we're looking at these pandemic stories, for example, across the neighborhoods of one specific city or town or region. So please feel free to get in touch if you are curious, if you're interested in sharing your insights, your story. Everything is anonymous unless you expressly request to not be anonymous in the work. And if you are a municipality or research institute or university department and are also finding this interesting, please feel free to get in touch.